What do you think trans men can add to the conversation of masculinity, or add to the thoughts and belief system around masculinity? I'd love to hear your perspectives on that.
I think we can add something.
I believe it too.
And the book Amateur I mentioned by Thomas Page McBee is so much about really a contemplation of masculinity, what it means to be a man, the man he wants to be, what have you. Beautiful book. I think you'd love it. I mean, I've had a lived experience of being perceived as not a man, of course. And also the sort of brief experience of like entering that space and like getting sort of treated in a different way, or in many ways, I feel so much for cis men being brought up and the limits put on them emotionally, encouraged to be, not sensitive, that vulnerability is weakness on some level or what have you, just ingrained misogyny. Obviously, we live in a very misogynistic society, queer phobic society, transphobic society, and having certain experiences I've had in my life with men has definitely highlighted certain things that I personally wouldn't want to be. And I suppose trans men, trans masc people can come to the table with those experiences and potentially offer something different or an insight that's different. Or I hope for cis men in so many ways that there can be more encouragement for expressing emotion and sensitivity and having close friendships with other men and all these things that seem to happen that are toxic.
Yeah, I think there's become such a pressure as well to just play the role of protector and provider, and that stoic kind of cold demeanor around emotion or challenges or stress. And that comes with its own form of limits to the human experience, to self-expression, to, I've always found personally, because I was raised by my mum growing up and witnessed her struggle and her stress and her pain and her challenge and just her resilience. And then also with a younger sister, I found that very useful because I grew up in an environment that was highly emotive and highly supportive of being emotive and expressing emotion. And I often think about, if I didn't have that experience, I don't know where else I would have got that from in my life. And that's interesting to think about, like how I could have grown up and never had that compass. It would never even have come across me. Where else would I have learned that? Definitely wouldn't have learned it at school. Definitely wouldn't have learned it at college. And then in the world of work, I definitely wouldn't have learned it either. So you could literally spend your whole life and never access some of these subtle, nuanced expressions, which are so key. Are there any specific interactions you've had or moments you've had where this kind of experience has been heightened, or some of the things you mentioned that you felt like, oh, wow, this was really powerful for someone or something?
I think maybe it allowed me to have certain conversations with cis men that I hadn't had before. Like it created an opening and, to be quite frankly, more empathy, because I've had not great experiences with men, and it's easy to lose some of the empathy sometimes, I think it's allowed me to have conversations with men about how they have not felt permitted to express themselves or have close relationships with other men, or, a certain age where emoting or self-expression in that way is not seen as a positive. And if anything, aggression is more, celebrated or encouraged, which is damaging to the person themselves and obviously the world. In my life, I've noticed things that are just more, subtle, but like men who used to, if I hadn't seen them for a while, we used to hug. And then now we're like, there's no hug. And I'm just like, these little things, I'm like, wow, that's fascinating, even myself at the very beginning, like having these like really brief moments, like, oh, should I talk with my hands less? Like, what, Elliot? Did that thought actually just enter your brain? No, be exactly who you are. But it highlighted something that even just in that tiny amount of time, something in me was starting to judge myself about how I was going to be as the man that I'm going to grow up to be. And it's, it's sort of embarrassing to admit, but feeling those sort of, pressures or misguided thoughts. But yeah, I think it's allowed me to have quite meaningful conversations with male friends that we hadn't really had before.
Yeah, and they probably haven't had before.
Yeah, and I think, and then I will say one thing. Yeah. I feel like a lot is blamed on testosterone. And as someone who's literally, jokes on me, going through puberty again, I will say, like, I'm not more angry. I'm the least angry I've ever been. It doesn't, like, I think, we're not taking into account the degree of socialization and and like toxic limitations that encourage, a lot of the behavior and issues we see with toxic masculinity.
Another challenge that you raised in the book, you said research has shown that transgender and gender non-conforming youth are 4 times more likely to struggle with an eating disorder. That obviously creates its own complexity. What does the research point to as the reason behind that, and how people can find support around that, especially with that complication?
Well, gosh, I mean, I'm not obviously like a professional that could give some exact.
Yeah, what have you come across is my question. Yeah.
I mean, from my experience, it's, a profound discomfort in the body of wanting to have a sense of control. For me, in some ways, I think too, being smaller, I looked more boyish when I was, so this sort of way of like literally controlling the body, and also just the sort of, sort of psychically, mentally, so much of your time becomes consumed with those thoughts that I think it's allowing you to not focus on other things, to think about other things, to contemplate other things.